On a Friday night in February, the company card bought a necklace I never saw. The receipt landed in my inbox. Because his assistant forgot to change the default email, I stared at the total like it was a number that could undo a life. The necklace cost $3,180 at a boutique called Vespera on Newbury Street. The transaction time was 9:13 p.m., the memo field blank, the last 4 digits of the card ending in 4412. I read it 3 times because sometimes repetition makes a thing behave. It didn't. The subject line of the email was an automatic hiccup from our expense tool. Review needed, card purchase pending category. Pending category. That was the first lie. Daily life before that looked like this. Eleanor Marlowe, 29, Boston. Financial analyst at Whitcomb Dean Studio, a boutique architecture firm with a grand name, tucked into the 5th floor of 77 Summer Street. Mornings were green smoothies and the red line if it wasn't sulking. Evenings were ink-stained hands from urban sketching sessions along the Charles. On Sundays, I set up at the Boston Public Market with a little metal stand and a sign that said, "Your City in Ink," and drew live vignettes for tourists who wanted the Greenway on paper more than in memory. It made just enough to feel true and not enough to threaten my job. The dean in Whitcomb Dean was Raphael, 44, founding partner, tall like he believed God measured people by ceiling height. He had the rare talent of making donors feel seen and interns feel chosen. In meetings, he listened with his whole body, leaning in, touching the table as if the grain could remember his fingers. He wore charcoal suits that avoided shouting, the kind of shoes that make no sound but say a lot. On site, he'd crouch to run a hand over poured concrete and say something like, "Space needs to breathe." He was persuasive without sweat. Red flags didn't show up as flags, they were the color of excitement. Raphael would appear at my desk with the casual chaos of a person who never carried his own bags and say, "Elena, you have the mind I trust for this." Then he'd slide over receipts with ink that hadn't dried from some lunch that was somehow a fundraiser, a scouting trip, and an interview at once. The line between client and date blurred because his version of charm was an open plan. He called me Hawk Eyes when I caught duplicate charges. He started calling me at 9 p.m. on Tuesdays when he knew I'd be home, asked me to walk him through budgets one more time, as if repetition could break a thing open like a nut. There was a Whitcomb in Whitcomb Dean, too. Margaret Whitcomb. She was 60 and more steel than the buildings we spec'd. She had gone to RISD and then to war with every contractor who ever called a corner good enough. Margaret wore black linen and combat boots and had a laugh like a foghorn. She loved our work and tolerated our donors. Raphael called her our conscience. He meant it as a compliment and a tether. The studio had grown from 5 people to 37 in 3 years. We had projects in Cambridge, Providence, Portland, a library renovation in Parma, Italy, a bow to Raphael's grandmother, he said, whose courtyard had taught him the music of shade. Growth came with a new kind of bill, the kind with commas that multiply when not watched carefully. That became my rhythm, watching commas, moving them back where they belonged. After the necklace email, I pulled up the last 2 months of corporate card activity. I told myself I was just doing my job. That's the sentence people use when they suspect they're about to lose a piece of their life and want to make it sound boring. There it was, a new pattern. Late Friday transactions at places where our clients might eat, but didn't. Ubers that began near the Four Seasons and ended nowhere near 77 Summer Street. A $1,210 day rate at a creative studio in Fort Point that looked like a bedroom with aspirations. The merchant category codes disguised nothing. My cursor hovered over flag for review and didn't move. People talk about instinct like it's a flash. Mine is a long hallway. On February 17th, I walked the hallway to Raphael's glass office and asked if he had a second. He always had a second when he wanted to rehearse a story. He was alone, jacket off, sleeves rolled to a forearm tan, earned from yacht decks, not job sites. I placed a printed page of flagged charges on his desk. Paper makes fiction sound heavier. "Walk me through these," I said. He scanned quickly, then slower, then rested a finger on the necklace like it might be a doorbell. He looked up with theatrical surprise and a small smile that said everything was a misunderstanding if you needed it to be. "Ah, Vespera," he said. "A donor gift. Discreet. Elena, you know the dance." "Which donor?" I asked. Quietly. "A breath can be a hammer." "Anonymous," he said. "She has a husband who likes his name on things. She likes gestures. We're on the cusp of closing a 7-figure pledge for the library restoration. The gift is placeholder art." "Placeholder art has a jewelry box?" I asked. Stupid brave. And Uber rides to the seaport at midnight. He laughed, not kindly. The thing about being smart, he said, is not advertising it as suspicion. I'm advertising it as accounting, I said. I have to categorize this by end of month. If it's a donor gift, we need a gift letter. If it's a client meeting, we need a note. If it's personal, it needs to be reimbursed. Do you think I would be sloppy? He asked, opening his hands like a man offering a dove. Margaret trusts me. You trust me. Whitcomb Dean is a family, and you, Elena, are not just a number cruncher. You're a guardian. But guardians don't cry wolf at these things. They shepherd. I felt the line he had thrown me like a cord around the ribs. Shepherd, guardian, caretaker of someone else's mess. It's astonishing how quickly a compliment turns into a harness. I left with nothing but a request to give me the weekend to send over that donor letter. He didn't send it. Monday was President's Day. Tuesday brought a contractor meltdown in Providence. Wednesday, a snowstorm. Thursday, an inbox that looked like an avalanche. Friday, a second necklace at Vespera, $2,450, 8:52 p.m. The memo field still blank. I emailed Raphael's assistant, a 24-year-old named Tori, who wore eyeliner like armor and made his calendar look like a rescue mission. She answered too quickly. Oops, wrong email on file. Fixing. Fixing felt like a verb that should come with sirens. I started writing it down. Not just the charges, but the times he called, the names he dropped, the phrases he repeated. I opened a file called WD Expenses, Anomalies Q1, and saved it with a password that I will not confess here because some things are sacred. I exported the last quarter of Amex statements into CSV and spent a midnight sorting merchant codes like a gambler counting cards. The numbers started to tell a story that wasn't mine. Restaurants in the Back Bay at hours when married donors were walking their dogs. Lift rides from the lobby of a condo building on Melcher Street to hotels with rooms that bragged about their views, as if views make vows small. The build-up wasn't dramatic so much as steady, like a ceiling drip you ignore because the bowl catches it. Raphael began to pop by my desk with more trust-me tone. He made a show of bringing in cannoli from Modern Pastry, powdered sugar dusting intention. He had a way of saying we when he meant you. We'll clean this up. We'll get the documentation. We'll make this invisible. He also began to talk about Palmer more than usual. The library project had hit an obstruction with the city council over vendor selection and local labor guarantees. We were stuck between two contractors, named on documents like enemies on a war map. Raphael's solution was charm abroad. We go back to the beginning, he told the board one Thursday in March, to the place that taught me to love public spaces. He pitched a team retreat in Italy like a pilgrimage. He'd take our top 5. Me, because donors trust the person who knows the money. Greta Nilsson, our Swedish project manager on loan from our Stockholm partner. 2 designers, Valentina and Josh, and Tori, because he never traveled without someone to catch what he dropped. Greta, 35, from Malmö, had been with our firm 6 months and ran schedules like air traffic control. She wore navy sweaters and silver rings with runes I didn't ask about. She watched everything as if there was a quieter, truer meeting happening beneath the table. She also sketched on coffee sleeves tight perspective studies of whatever building we were in and slid them to me like trading cards. She became the first person in that office who said, "I trust your eyes," and meant it like a compliment, not a collar. We flew to Milan on March 21st and took a train to Parma, checked into the Grand Hotel de la Ville, 2 blocks from the library site. Raphael scheduled us down to chunks, site walks, meetings with the Soprintendenza, dinners with friends of the arts. The first 2 days felt like purpose. The third smelled like perfume that didn't match anyone on the team. The breaking point arrived dressed as celebration. April 2nd, an event at the Palazzetto Eucerio San Vitale, stone walls and fairy lights, and a table set for 40 donors with knives that looked like threats. Raphael gave a toast about stewardship of memory, and I watched a woman in a red silk dress laugh at exactly the right places. She wasn't a donor I knew. She wasn't on our seating chart. She wore a necklace I recognized because it had already visited my inbox. Later that evening, after an espresso that could have stripped paint, I went to find my coat. The door to a side hall was propped open with one of those carved stone angels that belongs in a story. In the hall, under a fresco of saints who never had to read balance sheets, Raphael stood with the woman in red. They weren't kissing. The moment had not tipped into that. He was standing too close, the way you stand with someone you have already kissed and might again. He said her name the way you say a word you've practiced. Livia. I went back to the table and thought about how people will defend a thing to the death that they would never put in writing. I thought about gift letters. I thought about donor secrecy. I thought about Margaret, who once said, "Clarity keeps the walls from buckling." I thought about how my job had turned into a series of positions I needed to brace. The morning after, I told Greta what I knew without telling her how I knew it. I said, "We have exposure." She didn't blink. She said, "Then we build scaffolding." She suggested we set up a shared drive for compliance documents and name it with a boring title no one would snoop, a thing like bid appendices, Rev C. She suggested we email Raphael a list of remaining items we needed for the Palmer budget and include a reminder to attach donor gift letters for the last quarter. Paper trails are less about catching someone than about pointing north when the map spins. We returned to Boston on April 5th. The following week was a tornado, push on the Providence project, an all-hands for a museum client, an unannounced visit from the board's audit committee chair, a man named Gerard O'Rourke with a face like a stop sign. O'Rourke asked for a random sample of Q1 expenses to keep us sharp. Raphael, cool as a deli counter tile, said of course, and sent him a folder named Q1 Non-Expenses Random Don Sample. Inside were exactly the receipts I'd asked Raphael for and had never received, all neatly scanned with notes that sounded like poetry. Dinner with A.M. Ray, staircase sponsorship, Uber to site, gift for anonymous donor with board approval. Anonymous, anonymous, anonymous. The names had the weight of a stamp that hasn't touched ink. I wish the breaking point were one cinematic thing, one outrageous humiliation. It was petty, public, and perfectly designed to make me look small. April 22nd, an architecture awards gala at the Cyclorama on Tremont Street. We won a thing no one remembers, and everyone drank as if memory were optional. At the cocktail hour, Raphael called me onto the stage to celebrate the backbone of Whitcomb Dean, our finance team. He put his arm around me, held me too tight. Then into the mic joked, "Eleanor here could make an embezzler look like a cleric." People laughed because a man who builds things has told them to. He let the laugh sit too long and looked at me like we shared a joke. Then he said, "And she keeps my little indulgences from the auditors." A ripple. I felt my skin shrink. I smiled the way women smile when trying not to embarrass a man. After, in front of a donor I admired, he added, "Elena knows how to keep receipts looking sharp." The donor laughed. He said sharp like clean. He said it like an indictment dressed as banter. He said it, and I felt my career tilt. I went home and didn't sleep. At 3:07 a.m., I opened the bid appendices to Rev C folder and added a subfolder called Q11 Compliance Backup. Into it, I dropped every export, every CSV, every email asking for letters that never came. I added a document titled Narrative versus Ledger, a phrase I stole from Margaret. In it, I wrote exactly this. If Raphael Dean is using corporate funds for personal relationships, this exposes the firm to tax penalties, reputational damage, and the possibility of a donor or partner alleging fraud. If Elena Marlowe knows and does not act, she becomes part of the story. I printed the document and put it in an envelope. Addresses matter. I wrote Margaret Whitcomb and her home address in Beacon Hill because I'd sent her holiday cards there. I walked it to the corner mailbox at 5:42 a.m. because sometimes action is a way to get your blood to stop making noise. The aftermath began like a controlled demolition, planned, loud, incredibly fast. On April 24th, I scheduled a meeting with Raphael and Margaret. I chose a conference room with no glass. Margaret arrived with a scarf the color of warning signs. Raphael arrived 5 minutes late and made a show of leaning back, making the chair groan. I placed a binder on the table. Inside, copies of the flagged charges, the missing letters, the donor contacts I had, the notes about Uber rides to hotels. I spoke softly because the soft voice is the one that attracts witnesses. Raphael reached for humor and found nothing to hold. "Elena," he said, "you have constructed a conspiracy from courtesies." Margaret didn't smile. "Did you buy jewelry on the corporate card, Dean?" she asked, dropping his last name like a title had been revoked. He said yes and added 29 unnecessary words, none of them reimburse. "Did you file donor letters for those gifts?" she asked. Silence can be its own exhibit. He didn't fill it. "Do you have any personal relationships with donors or consultants that might be perceived as a conflict?" she asked. "I am personal with many donors," he said, as if that were generous. "They are people, not checkbooks." "Answer the actual question," Margaret said. He did not. That afternoon, I was locked out of our expense software. IT told me it was a glitch, the way people talk when they've been instructed to say nothing. At 5:12 p.m., I received an email from HR scheduling a meeting for 9 a.m. the next day with an update to your role. I responded by forwarding my entire Q1 compliance backup folder to Margaret and separately to my personal email and then to my attorney because I now had one. Lawyers arrive in your life like dentists. You wish you hadn't needed one so badly. Mine was a woman named Luz Carvajal out of Cambridge who specialized in employment law for women in finance and biotech, and every time she said document, it sounded like shield. I called her from the brick strip between the building and the alley with my coat on, maybe wrong. I told her everything. She told me 3 things. Don't resign, don't delete, don't meet alone. The next morning, I walked into the HR conference room with Luz on speaker, my binder under my arm, and my heart acting like a drumline. HR informed me that an anonymous complaint alleged inappropriate access and manipulation of financial records on my part. They said I had been provisionally suspended with pay, pending an investigation. They took my laptop like a parent confiscating a phone. They asked me to sign a document acknowledging confidentiality. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I said, this is retaliatory. I said, I have reported concerns to the board. I said, this is why we have audit committees. Luz spoke, calm as a winter lake. We expect preservation of all relevant records. The HR director's pen faltered. That afternoon, Greta texted in the code we had agreed on. Do you still have the coffee sleeves? It meant she had seen something. At 6 p.m., in the chill of April, pretending it was March, she handed me a manila envelope as if we were in a worse movie. Inside were printouts of calendar entries Tori had edited after the fact, now restored by IT with the faint grey footprints of revision. Inside were 2 email chains between Raphael and Olivia S., where they discussed framing events as donor touchpoints and keeping our finance hawk on a leash. Inside were 2 photographs from Parma, one of Raphael and Livia against sandstone at midnight, one of a blue velvet jewelry box on a marble ledge with a caption in Italian about promises that sparkle. Greta had marked places with lined post-its like tabs in a cookbook. It will not be pleasant, she said, but you will win. Escalation comes in 2 flavors, petty and dangerous. I got both. Raphael sent me emails full of wounded collegiality, wishing me clarity in this time and reminding me of the trust we've built. He told colleagues he didn't want to lose a talent and that he was committed to finding the truth. At the same time, someone left an unmarked envelope at my apartment door in Somerville with printouts of my old student loan statements, as if debt cancels out integrity. Another night, my doorbell camera caught a figure in a baseball cap trying my doorknob at 2:11 a.m. The third night after the HR meeting, a black Mercedes idled across from my building for 20 minutes. The driver's face glowed blue from a phone and never looked up. I documented everything. I emailed Luz with subject lines like Incident 2:11 a.m., Attempted Entry, and Mercedes 11:27 p.m., plate obscured. I filed a report with Somerville PD and installed a second lock. I told my landlord, a stoic man named Victor who treats drywall like family, and he tightened my building's front door closer so it wouldn't be propped. At work, my badge was deactivated. When I returned to HR for a scheduled statement, I was escorted from the lobby to the conference room by a guard who tried to make small talk about the Bruins. I did not. Luz advised me to go to the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination with a retaliation complaint. We did. We also drafted a letter to the board reminding them of their fiduciary duties. Margaret, bless her scuffed boots, responded within an hour. We hear you. The audit chair, O'Rourke, asked for a secure link to all files. We provided one. He asked for my Serena No. Wrong story, different life, different man. He asked for my Elena Ledger, and I named it what it was. Marlowe Working Ledger, Q1 Records. He read it the way men of his generation read the sports page. The next week, the board put Raphael on administrative leave. The email went out to staff at 8:06 a.m. on a Monday. It said exactly this. Effective immediately, Raphael Dean will be on leave pending the outcome of a review of certain financial procedures. The firm's operations will continue under the leadership of co-founder Margaret Whitcomb and the executive team. We were told not to discuss it externally, which means every donor called within an hour. Raphael did not take leave quietly. He called me from a blocked number at 10:23 p.m. that night and left a voicemail where he said my name like he owned it. He said I had misunderstood the intimacy of philanthropy. He said I had burned a bridge to make a spectacle. I saved the voicemail, emailed it to Luz and then to O'Rourke with a subject line that was just the timestamp. I blocked the number and slept with my binder on the chair like a cat. There is a moment in every messy story when a person you did not expect steps across the tape and makes the air different. Mine was a quiet guy in IT named Ronnie from Lithuania, a chess player who eats lunch at his desk and always brings extra apples. He found me in the lobby after a meeting and said he wanted to show me something purely hypothetical. On a laptop, he opened a log of edits on our expense tool. He pointed at timestamps that coincided exactly with my suspension. He showed me that access to my account had been used from an IP that belonged to Raphael's home in Beacon Hill. He said nothing else. He didn't have to. We handed that to the board and to the outside auditors they had engaged. The story changed tone. It stopped being about my supposed embezzlement and started being about his. Words like misappropriation and self-dealing appeared in emails that were CC'd to law firm partners, whose rates begin with 8s. Donors who liked fairy lights and speeches liked those words less. Through all of this, my life, the part that was just mine, was trying to happen. On Thursday evenings, after I had finished being a problem at work, I still went to sketch with the daytime people who become night people because paper forgives everything. A new person started appearing at the bench near the Elliott Bridge. His name was Owen McKay, 33, Irish by way of Detroit, a steel fabricator working out in Everett. The kind of person who drives a truck you can trust. He had forearms mapped by cuts and a laugh that began in the eyes. He asked about my lines without asking for my number. He brought a thermos of tea and didn't try to explain me to myself. The first time he saw my hands shake, he didn't say don't. He said, hold the pen like you're reminding the page it wants this. He didn't hate Raphael. He didn't love him. He was not a plot. He was a person. And he stood there on a windy night when my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number that said, you will pay for this. And I looked at him and realized I wasn't afraid. That may sound dramatic. It was quiet. That's what courage actually sounds like. Paper on paper, graphite whispering. The ending is not a victory lap. It is a set of steps that add up to a distance. May 19th, 9 a.m., the board met. May 19th, 11:40 a.m., Raphael's employment with Whitcomb Dean ended for cause. The phrase stood in the email like a pillar. I don't know what severance looked like. I do know he surrendered his corporate Amex in the lobby to the same guard who had walked me into HR like a suspect. I know because the guard told Victor, and Victor tells me things like weather. June 1st, the auditor's summary. Raphael had used corporate funds for personal expenses, totaling $87,340 over 18 months, disguised as donor outreach and client hospitality. He had backfilled documentation after my inquiries began and attempted to access my account through improper means. There was no evidence I had manipulated anything. There was ample evidence I had tried to stop it. June 3rd, HR apologized with the earnestness of people who have avoided court. They reinstated me formally and offered me a title bump and a salary bump that made my mother gasp on the phone. I asked for something else instead, an internal control overhaul and a written policy that any complaint about financial impropriety goes to the board and to me in writing. I asked for Whitcomb Dean to hire an external controller. I asked for Tori to be left alone because she is 24 and doesn't deserve to be crushed by a story she didn't write. They agreed. They hired Greta as director of operations. They asked me to train the new controller. I stayed. For now. It felt less like forgiveness than architecture. Raphael tried to call me twice more from unknown numbers. I never picked up. He posted a public statement that he had made errors in judgment in pursuit of art and patronage. He said he would take time to reflect. He went very quiet after a local paper ran a story that included the phrase expense fraud and the words sources close to the board. I didn't give a quote. I didn't need to. The necklace didn't either. It was photographed on Livia's public Instagram one night in July in a mirror in a different city, with a caption in Italian about learning the difference between gift and debt. In August, Margaret asked me to join her for a site walk in Worcester, a community arts centre renovation. We stood in a dusty main hall under trusses that had seen too many winters. She looked at me and said, "You remind me of me before I became impossible." She squeezed my shoulder and then, because she is incapable of sincerity without a bruise, said, "Don't let me become your new Raphael." I told her I wouldn't. We chuckled the way people chuckle when nothing is funny, but everything is lighter. Owen held the other part of the rope. He came to the public market and watched me draw people eating pretzels like it was magic. He told me about beams, about how metal pretends to be emotionless until you hear it sing when it's cut. He invited me to a union barbecue in Quincy where the potato salad tasted like a standard and the kids' names were on their water bottles. He made me a small shelf from scrap steel and sanded it so smooth it reflected the plants I put on it. He was a mirror without the mean. On a humid night in September, I walked past Vespera on Newbury Street on my way to buy nothing I needed. The window displayed a necklace very much like the one that started this, silver instead of gold, modest instead of loud. A woman and a man stood behind me, admiring. The woman said, "I'll forget it by tomorrow." The man said, "If you love it, we'll get it now." I laughed quietly. I had spent months building a case based on numbers and made a life out of things numbers can't hold. I had been called guardian, hawk, manipulator, martyr. I was none of those and some of them. I was a person who wrote it down and then did the next thing. This part isn't justice, it's symmetry. At the awards gala in the spring, Raphael joked he could make an embezzler look like a cleric. After he left, we went back to the cyclorama for a different event. A community dance night. No speeches, no donors, just people moving. I stood on the floor under the dome and watched a girl spin with her skirt as a fan. A man asked if I danced. I said sometimes I make lines instead. He asked if that felt like dancing. I said, today it does. Here is the twist, the mirror to that first neon purchase. He thought a necklace could live as a secret ledger entry. He thought it would shine only in the dark. He said I wouldn't understand the intimacy of philanthropy. He said I would forget this because careers make people forget. But I'm the one who forgot him.